Hi, my name is David Kalinsky. I'm the author of Torah Allegory, and today I'm going to present to you my first slide, a presentation of the first day of Genesis, Genesis 1:1 through, I believe it's Genesis 1:5. So let's just jump right in and talk about what this is all about. Before we start, let's define some terms. An allegory is a story that symbolically relates a more complex political, moral, or spiritual idea, a story that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. We're going to be talking about Torah allegory. The Torah is the first 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And we're only going to be doing the very first day of what's referred to as creation, starting from Genesis 1:1. This allegory is based on my understanding of Hebrew etymology. I do not want to present this as standard Hebrew etymology or standard Semitic etymology. I've been working in this field as a layperson for about 25 years. I've written a 900+ page dictionary of Hebrew etymology. Again, I don't want to suggest to you that what I'm going to be saying is standard, universal, or even accepted by your average Semitic linguist. There are those Semitic linguists who have seen my work, who appreciate my work, and there are many, many who think that many of the things that I say are absurd. It definitely comes from outside of the professional field, but it's well researched, and I hope to convince you over time that it is, in fact, accurate, even though quite different from your standard Semitic etymology. The reason why it's so different is because my paradigm is, although based on the standard paradigm, somewhat different. And the definition of a paradigm is written here: a general mental model or framework containing the basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology for understanding the structure or workings of a particular scientific field. In etymology, in Semitic etymology, it's understood that Semitic words are basically based on what's called a triliteral root, a 3-letter consonantal root, and that other words are derived from that root, related words are derived from that root by adding different vowels and also some prefixes and suffixes to the word. We'll see that as we go. And my understanding of that paradigm is a little bit different than the standard model, and I'll explain that as we go. As we go through this allegory, you'll see that I'll be referring to different archetypes. An archetype is a pattern of thought or behavior that is universally present in the minds of individuals. And you'll see very soon what I mean by that. I'll refer to it again. So beginning with Genesis 1:1, we see here in Hebrew it says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. My translation of that is, in a beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the Peshat, or basic understanding or translation. There's some controversy about this very, very first 2 words or 3 words. Some people say that the correct way of translating this is that in the beginning of God's creating. But I disagree with that, and I have some notes here on top about that. I say against this claim that this word is used in a construct phrase with the following word, bara. There's 2 problems here. One, in order for that to be true, you need to change the vowels of that verb, bara, to make it a construct phrase. And other people claim that the word Bereshit is only used in construct phrases, and I have here references that show places where it's not used in a construct phrase. The truth is that more than half of the time it is used in a construct phrase with another either verb or noun, but here are some references here that show that it's not universally done so. Now, to talk about the allegory of this word, those of you who know Torah know that Adam, which means human being, does not come into this story until the end of this chapter, at the end of chapter 1 of Genesis. But I'm going to propose to you that allegorically, we should see the very, very, very first person in this very first word. Now, why do I say that? Well, the word Bereshit comes from the word reshit, and the word reshit comes from the word rosh. The word rosh means head, and again, according to my etymology, this is not standard or accepted. The word rosh comes from the word ra'ah, which means to see. The head is the place of seeing. And so Bereshit allegorically is being interpreted here as in the place of a person seeing. So what's happening in this place of a person seeing? So what's happening is that Elohim is creating the heavens and the earth, and we're going to get to what those words mean allegorically in the next slides. I do have a note here that this is as opposed to Adam, and you'll see that it says here Adam, represents a person's thinking, and the basis for that is that my belief is that it comes from the verb dama. The word dama means to think imaginatively and make comparisons. So Adam, formed from this verb, represents a person's thinking, where the presentation here in our first word of Bereshit is a human being who is not necessarily demonstrating thoughtfulness. So the verb order in biblical Hebrew is VSO, that's verb, subject, object. And here in this first verse where it says Bereshit bara Elohim, it is in a beginning, Elohim created. And so let's discuss what Elohim is. There are a number of different words used for God in the Torah and the Tanakh. Elohim is introduced here in this first verse. Elohim is a plural noun. The singular is Eloah. Most people, most scholars, most linguists say that Eloah is simply an expansion of El. El means God. But I disagree with that, and I'm going to try to explain that here in this slide. I believe that Eloah is actually another noun formed from the verb lawa. In modern Hebrew, that would be pronounced lava, but this is with a wow, which is now a vav. So in the past, it was lawa. I have in the next two slides many examples of forming a noun by adding a prefixed aleph to a root. And so you'll see that in the next slide. But the verb lawa, in addition to meaning a number of other things, means to escort. The Levites, or Levi, in the Torah, their job was to escort people through the sacrificial system. So Eloah, it is used to mean God, but I would suggest that specifically it is a divine counselor, one who guides and escorts. The plural, Elohim, is used to refer to God very generally, but it also refers to other people's gods, pantheons. Generally, it's Elohim Acherim, which is other gods. However, it doesn't have to be Elohim Acherim to refer to other people's gods. In the Tanakh, that is Torah, which is the teaching, Nevi'im, prophets, and Ketuvim, which is writings. Elohim is used in a variety of different ways, and I've given 6 examples here. As I said, it refers to the pantheon of gods. It refers to the monotheistic God, the one God, as in this verse. Generally, when it refers to the monotheistic God, it is joined with or combined with a singular verb, even though this is a plural noun, although there are at least 3 instances just in the book of Genesis where that plural noun uses a plural verb, either directly in the sentence or it's a reference to. It also refers to a council of angels. It also refers to a judicial council of humans. Written here, number 5, it says it also refers to the soul of a deceased prophet. In the book of Samuel, Samuel, he has died, and Saul, who is king, is experiencing some uncertainty, and he wants to speak with the spirit of Shmuel, and he goes to a psychic, which is now against the rules because of his own decree. And when she brings up the spirit of Samuel, he says, "What do you see?" And she says, "I see Elohim." That's a not direct quote, but close enough. And then finally, when God is speaking to Moses, God tells Moses that he will be Elohim, or a source of guidance, for Aharon, his brother, and for Pharaoh. So these are just 6 of the examples of how Elohim is used. It might even be used in other ways that I'm not expounding upon here that I haven't quite come across. But you can see that it's not just simply meaning God. In the Ugaritic pantheon, Elohim was the name of the pantheon. It was not used to refer to God. The first god in the Ugaritic pantheon was El, and someday in the future I'll explain how El actually means the initiator. And again, so Elohim is the pantheon, but it means many, many other things, and it is used as a source of guidance allegorically because it is also used as a council, either a council of angels or a council of human beings. So one objection that many linguists would give against using or saying that Elohim derives from, or Eloah derives from Loah, is that most linguists believe that Eloah is an expansion of the word El. The word El means God. Actually, the word El literally means initiator, but we could discuss that another day. In the Canaanite pantheon, El is the first of the gods, the initiator. But this idea that you can create a noun or even another verbal root by prefixing an aleph or adding an aleph to the beginning of another root is not universally accepted. So I have here on this page and on the following page, and you can pause and look at these words, I have a number of words that demonstrate that words are created, in some cases, by prefixing an aleph to a root. And as I said, you should pause this page and take a look at these. I'm not going to go over each one. And then on the next page as well, you'll see that, and I'll just make a mention of that. So on the previous page, that demonstrated nouns that were created by prefixing the letter aleph to a three-letter root. But here on this page, I demonstrate both verbs and nouns that are added to a root that still maintain a three-letter root structure. And as I said, I encourage you, if you're familiar with Hebrew at all or Semitic languages, to pause this page and take a look at these words. So moving on from there, we want to examine this verb bara. There's an idea in Judaism that the verb bara, which means to create, means creation from nothing. That would make sense, obviously, if this is the creation of the universe. There's nothing there. Even in science, we say there was nothing there, then there was the Big Bang. And so this is creation from nothing. However, when you examine this root in the Tanakh, in the entire Jewish Bible, that's not exactly true. In fact, the verb is used in other ways. And you'll see here I have references. It also means to carve a physical sign. It means to carve up people after being stoned to death. It means to clear a forest. And then there's a noun, baria, which means healthy appearing, and it actually means sculpted. And the reason why I say it actually means sculpted is because the word bara, as you see, it means to carve, literally means to create through sculpting. And it's related to, and here's a number of words, it's related to a number of words that all mean to clear away, or to go clear through. And you could see that here. It says, according to my paradigm, bara evolved from the verb bara with a hey, literally meaning to clear away, but it's also used, that word is used to mean to consume. And there are many other verbs with these two letters, bit, rish, in the root, that often literally mean to clear away, make clear, or go clear through. So the first of those words is the word bor, which means a clearing or a pit. And then there's the word barar, which is created by doubling that final consonant, and that means to clear away or to sift. There is the word ba'er, which is literally a clearing, but is understood as a well. And there's a verb form that means to clearly elucidate or to make something clear. There's then ba'ar with an ayin, which means to clear away. And this is an interesting verb. It means to clear a field. It means to burn a field. It could also be clearing the field by setting animals in there and letting them eat up the field. But because it also means to burn, it also means to ignite. It also means to extinguish. There's a lot that can be said about this verb. Then there's barach. And barach literally means to go clear through, and it's used to mean to flee or to escape. But it also means a traversing bar. There's sections in the Torah where it talks about putting a bar from one piece to another piece, and that is a bariach. And that just goes clear through from one end to the other. In other Semitic languages, it doesn't mean those things, and it means to be clear or transparent in Syriac. And from that same idea of being clear or transparent, it means to beam or shine through in Akkadian. So once again, to go clear through. Then there's the word barach. The word barach is pretty well known. It is generally understood as to bless, although we have things to talk about that. The word is used to clear an area because if you're going to put your animal down on its knees, which the word for knee is berech, you're going to make a clearing. And you'll see that here in the second one. It says to clear, make a clearing, to kneel. But in terms of the word barach, which means to bless, let's look at the word baruch. We say in Judaism, baruch atah, and we say then God's name, and we translate it as blessed are you, God. But the question is, who is blessing God? No one blesses God. God is who God is, and we're going to be talking about what we think God might be throughout this series. But God is not blessed by anyone. God is beyond everyone. And in fact, that is what Baruch means. It means clear or beyond everyone and everything. And then there's a PL form of that verb, which means to declare beyond everything, or as I have here, to declare excellent. So a better translation of Baruch rather than blessed is really clear to beyond everything or excellent. And you'll see here, there's also a word barecha, which means a clearing, a pool. So this root really does mean to be clear of something and not to bless. To bless is just a particular case. In the book of Job, this root is used to curse. And again, cursing is just a way of declaring something or some entity as beyond the pale, as we might say in Judaism, beyond something else. So if I bless you or if I curse you, I'm hoping that you are beyond what's usual or normal. And that is really literally what this word means. You see here that there's also root barak, which means lightning. It also means to go clear through. Baraz means to penetrate, and barzel is iron, what penetrates or goes clear through. And barad, which comes from baraz, means hail. And just like iron goes clear through things, hail often does. I live here in Texas, and here in Texas, people are replacing their roofs fairly regularly because a hailstorm comes through and destroys their roof. The hail goes clear through their roof. So to reiterate what I said in the previous slide, the word bara does not really mean to create from nothing. It really means to sculpt. And so we have God, Elohim, which is God's guidance, sculpting something. And what is it that God is sculpting? Well, the first word, it says et hashemayim. The word et, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, maybe one other day, but the word et is the marker of the direct object in Hebrew. Most people say it doesn't have a meaning. It actually does have a meaning. It means the persistent existence of. When we distinguish between a book and the book is one that persists in reality. A book is something that we're thinking of or we're conceiving of, but it doesn't necessarily exist as something that we're specifically talking about. So God creates the heavens. This word also means skies, shemayim, and the earth, the aretz or eretz. Let's talk about the word shemayim first. There's a myth in Judaism that the word shemayim is a combination of fire, which is aish, and mayim, which is water. That's basically not true. The word shemayim comes from a root shum, which is not used in biblical Hebrew, although it is used in other languages. The word shum essentially means to put place, impose, label, arrange. You could see that the words in Hebrew, it means to name, to appraise, to assess, to value, to evaluate, to estimate. It also means to tax and impose a fine, although none of these are used in the Tanakh, in the Torah, in the prophets, or in the writings. In Arabic, this root means to impose, to force, to ordain, to demand, to treat unjustly, to offer for sale, to haggle, to bargain. It's to propose something, basically, to put something forward, or to impose on someone. Propose and impose are related words, related roots in English. In Syriac, which is a form of Aramaic, it means to impose, so it means to inflict with pain, to cut, to wound. And in Akkadian, one form of this verb means to buy or purchase, and another form means to injure or to cause pain. And we can see that throughout with the other definitions. There is a root that derives from shum that is used in the Tanakh all the time, and that is the word sim. I'm using the modern pronunciation. The ancient pronunciation of this letter was actually shim. Shim. It's a weird sound. I'm not saying I'm saying it perfectly, but lasim comes from shum. It means to put, place, and arrange. And so Shemayim is related to all of that, and it means literally what is put, placed, or arranged in the skies. So it refers to all the stars and the planets, and during the day, the sun. For those of you who know Hebrew, you might notice that it's a double, meaning in Hebrew there are singular and plural as we have in English, but there's also doubles. So we could say one hand, two hands, or many hands. And Shemayim is double, and I suggest that the reason why it's a double is because we have a daytime sky and a nighttime sky. It's not really all that complicated. But allegorically, the Shemayim represents things that God arranges for us in our experience. In other words, the opportunities that God as guidance arranges for us in our experiences. Now let's see what eretz means, and then we'll talk about how that's relative to Shemayim. The word eretz you see here means earth and land. It literally, according to my etymology, according to my paradigm, means what is run upon, what is crushed. Allegorically, it is the way a person runs or the way a person disposes oneself in experience. So there's a verb in Hebrew, roots, which means to run. And then there are many, many, many roots, more than a dozen maybe, that are related to roots that also literally mean to run, but they have specific meanings. So we see here that there's one that is ratzah, and ratzah means to run toward something, and in biblical Hebrew it means to show favor. In modern Hebrew, they changed that to mean to want. When you want something, you run toward that. It doesn't come from biblical Hebrew, but I think it's a fairly accurate usage of the idea of the root. And in the Talmud, or in later writings, there is the use of the word artzut, which comes from ratzah, which means a person's disposition or the way a person runs in life. And then there's a verb ratzatz, which is formed by taking a ratzah and adding another tzadi, which means to run upon literally, and it's understood as to crush. So it means to run upon something and crush it. And the word eretz, the word for land or earth, is what a person runs upon and crushes. In English, we could refer to that in scientific terms as the crust of the earth, the thing that we run upon and crush. So wherever we see the word eretz or aretz when it's in that form, what I want you to think that it means symbolically, allegorically, is the way a person runs in experience. So what do we have in this first sentence? We have in a person's place of seeing, that's Bereshit, God's guidance creates an arrangement of opportunities and a way for a person to run to it. I'm going to review that again in the next slide. But basically, this is a statement of a person's free will. That's in the very, very first verse of Torah. So on this slide, I broke down that first verse. Bereshit, in a place of a person seeing. Elohim, God's guidance, that's to be found in experience. Bara, God created, sculpted, cleared a space for. Et HaShemayim, the many things placed or arranged in experience, opportunities. And the earth, or the way a person runs or disposes themselves in experience. And as I said before in the last slide, this is a statement of free will. We have lots of opportunities that are placed and arranged before us, and we have within us, and this is the first example of an archetype, we have within us the archetype, the ability to run and dispose ourselves to any of those things, any of those opportunities that are put, placed, or arranged for us by God's guidance in our lives. Before we go on to the next verse, Genesis 1:2, I just want to make a mention here with this slide that the name of God in verse 1:1, the first verse of the Torah, is Elohim and not the Yud He Vav He, or what was in the past the Yud He Wow He, because the letter Vav previously was a W sound. This is very, very important because, as I said before, Elohim allegorically represents God's guidance. The Yud He Vav He is the he feel form or the causative form of the verb haya, which means to be or to exist. And linguists agree for the most part that the Yud He Vav He means God who brings forth existence. And since Genesis chapter 1 is purported to be the creation of the universe, of the physical universe, we have a problem here because one would expect that the Yud He Vav He would be the name of God that's used to create existence, the physical existence, but in fact it's not. The Yud He Vav He is not used in the Torah until chapter 2, specifically Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, which should tell us that in fact what is going on in chapter 1 is that we're getting a blueprint for how God guides us through our lives as Elohim, and not an actual literal creation of a physical universe. Obviously, if it was the creation of existence, it would be the Yud He Vav He. This is just another example of how the Torah uses words in very, very specific ways. And Elohim, as God's guidance in chapter 1, allegorically is giving us guidance on how to live our lives. And this is not a physical creation of the universe. It may be on the Pashat, which is the usual translation of the text, but it is not in the allegory. So moving on to the second verse of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it says, V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu, v'choshech al pnei tahom, v'ruach Elohim mirachefet al pnei hamayim. The regular translation, the Peshat translation of this is, and the earth was stillness and disordered, and darkness was upon the surface of the deeply stirred waters. And a spirit of Elohim was one hovering over the surface of the waters. Of course, there are different ways of translating that. Tohu vavohu is often translated as unformed and void. I'll explain why I don't translate it that way right now. The word that here, we're going to just take the first part of this verse, v'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu. The noun tohu comes from the verb taha, and that means stillness or idly astonished. It can be used to refer to a person. If it refers to a person, it means to gaze, to be astonished, to be confounded, or regret. And so then the noun tohu means to be idly astonished. And for objects, it could be idle or waste or absence of utility in vain. So on the Peshat, tohu vavohu is stillness and disordered, but allegorically, tohu is idly astonished. And again, the earth allegorically refers to our ability to run towards something experience, our disposing ourselves in experience. So our ability to dispose ourselves to the opportunities and experience was tohu. It was idly astonished. The word vohu means disordered when it refers to an object, but it means confused when it refers to a person. It literally means forced or broken into. And so again, allegorically, the earth, the eretz, the person's ability to run or dispose themselves to the opportunities that are placed before them in experience, was idly astonished and confused. And I'll explain why that is in the upcoming slides. The next part of this verse is v'choshech al pnei tahom. The word choshech means darkness. The word pnei means surface or face, and tahom generally is translated as deep, but it literally means deeply stirred waters. It can refer to the ocean. It can refer to well water. It could refer to the water table that's beneath the earth. It comes from the verb hama, which means to stir up. So it literally means that which is stirred up. There are other words that come from hama, and I have a list here. The word hamon, which is a loud, riotous crowd. The word haim or hain, which refers to they, either masculine or feminine. The word yam, which is sea or ocean. And from yam, we get the word maim, which is water. And the word yom, day, which is the time of stirring up. All of these words come from the root hama, and they all literally mean stirred up in one way or another. Allegorically, the tahom represents the repository of things stirred up in experience, and the word choshech, and I believe this is on the next slide, refers to a holding back. So we'll talk about that when we move on to the next slide. So here we're talking about the word choshech, and you'll see that it means darkness, but I have quite a long explanation here I'll read. The evidence suggests an unattested root, shuch, meaning to hedge in, that evolved into shachach, to abate, or to be cordoned off, be hedged in. Shakav, which means to snuggle or huddle or lie down. Shakach, to repress, to forget, faint, to languid. Shakar, which means intoxicated. Neshech, or nashach, to bite. Then there's the word sach, which would, in the old pronunciation, be shach, which means to hedge in. And then we have choshech, which is, again, darkness. So while the last of these include the words for darkness, choshech, this root means things that are prickly in Arabic, to grow dim, darken, and make obscure in Hebrew, to eclipse, obscure, dim, and darken in Syriac, and to grasp or seize in Ugaritic. Further derived from this root is hasach, which means to restrain or hold back in Hebrew and Syriac, and whose Arabic cognate means to cram in. So we get the sense that choshech actually essentially means what hedges in, and from that we get obscures, and then we get darkens. So the darkness upon the surface of the deep allegorically represents a person's hedging in the repository of things stirred up in experience. So if the first part of this sentence was, and the earth was tohu vavohu, the person's ability to run or dispose themselves to the opportunities in experience were idly astonished and confused, then on top of that, in addition to that, the person is then hedging in all of the other possible things that are stirred up in experience. So this is consistent with the person's being idly astonished and confused, which is tohu vavohu. And our verse is not yet complete. We'll do that in the next slide. The final section of the second verse of Torah is V'ruach Elohim mirachefet al penei hamayim. And the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the surface of the waters. This represents an eventual solution to the problem of the person's being stunned and idly astonished and confused, the holding back of opportunities that are stirred up in experience. Because God's guidance, Elohim, is hovering over the many faces or aspects of what's stirred up in experience, which is represented by the waters. The ruach, which is the spirit, that word also means wind and breath. That word literally means what goes back and forth. You can see that I have some related words here. There's the word roch, which means expanse or distance, and rawach in the ancient pronunciation, or rovach in the modern, more modern pronunciation, which means to be wide. And then there's the he feel form, or the causative form of the verb, which means to waft. And so the spirit or breath of wind of Elohim is a wafting extensiveness of God's guidance that's going back and forth. So again, this is going to provide the solution to a person's inability to function. We have in that first verse that God presents a person with all of these opportunities, which is represented by the heavens, the Shemayim, the things that are arranged in experience. And there's the person's ability to run to these things, but because that ability is tohu vavohu, which is idly astonished and confused, they're unable to function. So this will present to us our solution, which is then going to be a form of guidance that enables the person to function. We now move on to the third verse. Having set up the solution in the previous verse with Elohim, the Spirit of God, hovering back and forth over the waters, we now have God, Elohim, saying, Vayomer Elohim yihi or, yihi or. And God was saying, Elohim was saying, let there be light, and there was light. The word for light is or. It literally means emanation, and we can see that when we look at other words that are related from the same root. There's the word awir, which means air, or rot, which means weeds or herbs. There's even a word mam ereth, which means malignant, which is going off in every direction. So you can see that it has to do with emanation. This last word is from a root ma'ar, but ma'ar is related to or. So additionally, the causative form of the verb that usually means to shed light, laha'ir, can also mean to make emanate outward, as occurs in Job 41:24, where it refers to the emanation of waves going out in the ocean. So that has nothing to do with light. So although the word laha'ir, the hifil or causative form of the verb, 98% of the time would be my guess, or maybe even 99, means an emanation of light or to shed light. The verb is also used for the emanation of waves in the ocean. Allegorically, the light represents a projection or emanation is what is available in experience, as well as the means to shed light upon it so as to see it. The light is a form of God's guidance, an emanation of opportunities that are lit up. So we have here the heavens, the deep waters, and the light. They're all a variant of the presentation of the opportunities that are available in experience. The heavens represent all that is put forth and available in experience. The deep waters represent the deep repository of what's stirred up in experience. The waters represent what's stirred up in experience, and the light represents an emanation of those same opportunities that are now lit up, and a person is now better able to see them. Hopefully, this will give some relief to the person when they see they're better able to see these opportunities, or some of these opportunities emanating towards them, that there'll be a little less tohu vavohu, that their ability to run towards these experiences, their ability to dispose themselves towards these experiences will be improved because they're lit up a little bit and a little bit more clear. We'll talk about that more as we go. In verse 4 of Genesis 1:4, the text says, V'yar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. And Elohim, God, was seeing the light, that it was good, or because it was good. The word to see is ra'ah, and it means to see. The vowels are changed here. If the vowels are changed here a little bit, we change the vowels to v'yera. The sentence means something a little bit different. It can mean that God's guidance was being seen. We have in the passive form. And that's what it means allegorically. Instead of it's God is seeing the light that it was good, allegorically we have, and God's guidance was seen, it being the light, and that it's good. The word good, tov, is similar to the word well in English. We have this word well, and it literally means to make something well upward. But the word tov is what wells upward when we push down into something. And you can see that from the related words that I have listed here. There's the word taval, which means to immerse into, to dip or plunge. Again, we push down into something. There's the word tava, which means to sink into, to drown or make an impression. The word tavach, which means to strike down or crush in Syriac. It also means to slaughter or butcher or cook. And then we have tavor, which is a very rare word, tavor ha'aretz, which is the swell of the land. And you can see my references there. So all of these roots come from tov. And since they all mean basically to push down into, you get a sense that that is actually what tov means, that it means to push down into, and then something wells up as a result of that. And so allegorically, and God's guidance was appearing with the emanation of lit up experience, the light, because it was welling upward. So again, as I said before, this is a resolution or a proposed resolution to the problem of the person's disposition being dumbfounded, idly dumbfounded, and confused. We have the guidance of God that that moves back and forth as a spirit, hovers back and forth over all that's stirred up in experience. And when God says, let there be light, that enables us to see that guidance better, and hopefully we'll then be able to engage with experience. The next part of this verse is, V'yavdel Elohim ben ha'or uven ha'choshech. And Elohim, God, was separating between the light and the darkness. Allegorically, this means that God's guidance was separating between the emanation of experience that was lit up and the person's hedging in of experience. So God's making a distinction here, a separation between our ability to engage experience, because it's now lit up and we can see it better, and our hedging in of that experience because we were overwhelmed by that experience. Moving on to verse 5, which is the final verse that we're going to be speaking about in this video. It says, Vikra Elohim la'or yom, v'lachoshech kara laila, v'hi g'arev v'hi voker yom echad. We're going to look at the very first part of that, which is Vikra Elohim la'or yom, v'lachoshech kara laila. And Elohim, God, was referring to the light, day, and to the darkness he called night. So the word yom, I mentioned before, comes from the root hama, to stir up. I believe it's a he-feel form of the verb, or a noun that's a variant from the he-feel form of the verb. And it means the time causing a stirring. That is what the daytime is, a time that stirs us up and gets us moving. The word laila appears to me to be a doubling of the root laha, which means to languish or be tired. It's only used once, as far as I know, in Genesis 47:13. So it means a time of languishing. There's another root that's related to that, which is la'a, which is lamed aleph he, which also means exhausted. It means to work to the point of exhaustion. And Lila appears to be a doubling of that laha. So it's the time of languishing. It's the opposite of yom, the time that causes a stirring. And so here where it says, and God was calling to the light day, he's basically saying that the light, this emanation of experience that is now lit up, is what stirs us up and gets us going. Whereas the darkness, which is our holding back what's stirring in experience, is representative of our languishing, of our not engaging experience. And so I have written here the allegory, and God's guidance was referring to the emanation of experience lit up, that which causes a stirring. And to the person's hedging in of experience, he called a time of languishing, not doing anything, basically. So here we are on our final slide for this video. This is the last part of Genesis 1:5. It says, Vihi erev vihi voker yom echad. And there was evening and there was morning, day one. For those who are familiar with Torah, you know that what would be typically expected here would be the first day, which would be Yom Rishon. It doesn't say Yom Rishon, it says Yom Echad, which the Torah does all sorts of strange and interesting things with the words to make specific points, and we're going to talk about that here. So typically, we would expect, again, Yom Rishon. That would be the grammatically correct way of saying this, but the Torah does not say this in the grammatically correct way. It says Yom Echad, and there's a specific reason for that. We have the evening, which is erev, and that word literally means a time of mixing. It comes from a root that means to mix, but that root also is used to mean to confuse. Mixing is confusion, or confusion is mixing. And so allegorically, this represents the person's being confused with what is seen in experience. It's consistent with the earth being tohu vavohu. But the word for morning, boker, literally means a time of investigation. It comes from a verb livaker. In modern Hebrew, that verb means to visit, but in biblical Hebrew, it means to seek and investigate and to visit. And this allegorically represents a person's making of an investigation so as to resolve the confusion. So why is this Yom Echad and not Yom Rishon? The word Echad, which means the word one, is derived from the verb hadad, which means to sharpen. This word for one represents a single sharpened point, but also derived from this root is a root chud, which is a chet vav dalid. The vav here is a vowel, And that means to sharpen also, but what it's used to mean is to test a person's acumen or to propose a riddle or an enigma. So allegorically, echad represents an episode of mental sharpening, because that's what the word literally means. So allegorically, what we have here is, and there was a time of confusion, and there was a time of investigation, and this was a time that was causing a stirring, a day, one of mental sharpening. So although we've only covered the first day here of creation, we see that what it represents, as I said before, is a blueprint of God's guidance. And that guidance starts us off with God presenting us with all sorts of opportunities as represented by the heavens, which are put, placed, and arranged before us, and giving us free will and enabling us to run towards those opportunities. But because our initial reaction to that is to be overwhelmed, the earth is tohu vavohu. The earth is idly astonished and confused. So God provides us with some guidance, which is what Elohim represents, and creates light. And so this is that first day, a day of confusion, a day of investigation. And for those, again, who know Torah, you'll know that for the next 5 days, it also ends, those days also end with, and there was evening and there was morning. So it again presents us with, and there's confusion and there's a time of investigation. And we will get to those in this series. We'll do each one of those. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, pose any questions, and I'll happy to answer them when I have the opportunity.